I'm really happy to have my esteemed panel here, and we're going to talk about the surface economy this afternoon. And before we do, I want to challenge all of you because I'm looking out there and I'm going to call you out. You're all on your phones. Well, not all of you, some of you. Because I bet you, I've got a stat here actually. The average consumer unlocks their phone 70 times a day. Sound accurate? How many times have you looked at your unlock screen just since lunch?
70.
Just since the panel changed over, right? So I'm going to challenge you all to put your phone down. Why? Because it's going to make you uncomfortable. And I would love for us to talk about this beautiful device and all the real estate and cool opportunities that we can do with it. We know right now we're at an inflection point in history. The average person is spending 5 or more hours a day on your phone. I feel like it's more, especially when I talk to my 11 and 9-year-old. But it's true. We're spending a ton of time on our phones. And we also know that 90% of people are watching video and consuming video on their phones. So it's a really interesting piece of real estate that we hold in our hands, and yesterday I was at one of the panels, and there was a gentleman, and he went and got some kind of swag or whatnot, and he walked away without his phone, and you would think he left his wallet there. That's how important these things are to us. So we know also, when you think about the surface economy, I'll be honest, when I was told I had the privilege to moderate this panel, I had to look up, what is the surface economy? What are they talking about now? We got AI, we got attention, all the buzzwords, of course. But if you think about it, and talking about that lock screen and how often you do pick up your phone to see what's happening on that, it is an interesting new piece of real estate. We've seen a trend in the Asian markets where that lock screen is actually becoming a marketing opportunity and a way to connect with consumers. We also know that, as marketers, that's a big opportunity. But as consumers, do we want that? Is it a little bit too intrusive? These are some of the questions I want to probe our panelists today to talk about. And then when you think about the human side of all of it, we're spending all this time on these devices and we're connecting with the brands that we love, but how are we then taking that and connecting with each other IRL or in real life? And so being able to connect with consumers to get that share of heart and share of wallet is super important, and there needs to be that value exchange in order for consumers to want to give up that data. And we'll talk a little bit about the privacy side of that as well. If executed well, I think this home screen and the lock screen, as I got to understand it a little bit more, I think it can be as convincing as an Instagram ad if done right. I know Dani's going to talk a little bit about some really cool, interesting things that she's done as well. But we do have a responsibility, I think, as marketers to ensure that it is a connection that is being done responsibly. We're not taking data where we shouldn't be. And then you've got the whole privacy equation that runs into that. So for the next 20 minutes, we're going to try and unpack all of this and talk about all of these interesting things that I just touched upon. And I'm going to introduce our panel here, where we've got at the end Joe DeMiero, who is U.S. Chief Executive Officer at We have Abhay Singhal, who's the co-founder and CEO of InMobi. And we have Dani, Mariano, President of Razorfish. So warm welcome. Thank you all for joining on this lovely this afternoon. Joe, I want to start with you, though. From an agency perspective and knowing the clients who you work with and hearing all the challenges, and even in our prep call, we laughed because I come from agency side, and we talked about you have to be an expert in everything. And clients hear the latest buzzword, and especially at a summit like this, I'm sure next week's going to be busy for you and your teams trying to unpack everything that you've learned this week. What are some of the big questions and opportunities and challenges that clients are putting your way?
Thank you again, by the way. Thanks to Tricia for organizing this and to Brand Innovators for pulling together this awesome event. Universal McCann is part of IPG Media Brands, and we're really fortunate to be able to work with, learn from, play with some really extraordinary brands. American Express, Johnson & Johnson, BMW, to just name a few. And I think this question's a really good place to start this conversation about mobile in particular, because the ubiquity of mobile kind of requires us to answer some of these fundamental challenges that marketers are facing today. And to sum it up, because there are so many challenges and so many opportunities, I think one of the big themes that we're hearing is this kind of tension in the past between brand and performance has really come to the forefront. We saw this in the pandemic in particular, this kind of rush to get out of brand marketing and really drive short-term performance results. We see that continue given the uncertainty of the economy globally. We see that given continued supply chain issues, the global dependence for most of our clients on not just what's happening in the US, but what's happening globally in various markets. And so this tension between brand and performance, I think, resonates in terms of how brands show up to consumers and where they show up in a way that there is a continued value exchange. And it's a key theme that we I think all brands are grappling with right now.
So how do you approach to balance that? I mean, you're speaking to the choir, because I know I'm not supposed to have an opinion, but I do agree with you 100% there, because, you know, as marketers, you get your budgets and you need to see those outcomes and that performance and that ROAS, but also you need to build a brand, and you need to have that brand love and that share of heart like I talked about. So do you have any examples where, you know, you've got a client that's a little more open-minded, where you can do some experimentation there?
It's a great question. So Universal McCann approaches this in a way that's pretty, I think, special. And if you'll bear with me on a phrase here that might be a little bit cheesy, and bear with me as I explain it just a smidge, we approach it not by thinking about how do we extract more value out of more consumers, but how do brands add more value over the course of the lifetime of consumers. And it's a way to think about human-centered design or kind of people-centered approaches to marketing in a way that really unlocks the balance and the integration and the dependence between brand and performance across all moments of the journey, across all channels. It's also a pretty extraordinary framework in terms of how brands like BMW, American Express, Johnson & Johnson, to just name a few, can think about not brand in the absence of performance, not performance in the absence of brand, but the synergies that exist between the two and the dependence on the two. And it's a theme that's really worked well for many of our clients.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. Abhay, I want to turn it over to you for a minute. When we think about the lock screen surface of our mobile devices, we know that it's kind of like a new frontier in a way, in the ability to attract that attention. From your perspective, how can game publishers, entertainment platforms, and the media industry leverage this space effectively without intruding on our experiences?
It's a very interesting question that you asked, Tricia. So, and InMobi has been in the business of mobile advertising for the last 15 years. I was telling Joe earlier, we started before iPhone was launched. So kind of, we've seen the entire wave of how this mobile device has become ubiquitous in our life and how apps have overtaken our world. But the interesting fact is that 90% of the user share of time is consumed within about 5 to 7 apps in total, maybe even 95% of the time. I think over the last 5 to 7 years, as users or as consumers, we've become sort of addicted to that cycle of 5 to 7 apps that we go through in a rotation. And God help us if we enter any one of them at any point in time. You'll only notice that you have entered into them when 15 to 30 minutes are gone. And then you'll be like, what did I do in the last 30 minutes? Why did I waste that time? So, but what's happening?
Guilty.
I think, yeah, but I think what's going on, I mean, we have that fleeting moment where we need either a quick fix of dopamine or we need to get what's going on around us. but we don't want it to become addictive. We don't want it to take us down a rabbit hole of one video after another video, or one message after another message, and so on and so forth. And that was the big realization that we had. The other side of the publishing industry is there are billions of dollars are being spent on creating content, and that content is just not getting discovered by the consumers, because either it is sitting behind those algorithms that are trying to close it down or keep it within the apps. So if you marry these two things, there came the big aha moment where we realized that the screens on your devices have inherent power. They've just been a medium to reach an app, but what if the screens itself can become a means to an end, rather than just being a conduit to getting an app? And that's where we've done it. So we have a number of different developers that are creating content right now for lock screens and home screens, where they've seen a remarkable increase in the number of users who are actually are able to reach their destination, because they are getting better content being represented to the customers, and customers are actually spending less time on their phone. In fact, that was the most interesting study that we saw, where on the devices where we have glance, we are able to actually bring down the amount of time that the consumers are spending on their phone, because they are getting to see what they want to see without having to go within different apps. So I feel that we are onto something very huge here, because I guess, you have a 9 and 11, I have a 10 and 12, and we are all addicted by, we're all worried about the addiction that this device is making our kids face. So I feel like we're probably able to fundamentally solve the problem of content discovery, device utilization, and de-addiction, all of them in one package.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and it really makes me think about my own experiences. And Dani and I were talking before this just about, the retail apps, and why do we get rid of apps on our phone? Are they communicating with us too much? Is it not the right message? Or why do we keep the ones that we love? Dani, I would love to understand, as we do look to unlock these immersive mobile experiences, what role do you think personalization plays in capturing attention and really being able to provide that tailored content?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for coming today. I think personalization is the heart of everything. If you think about your mobile device, it's the most personal access you have to your family, your friends, your memories, your favorite soundtracks, your most kind of private conversations over text. And so personalization as marketers is critical to ensuring that we are delivering value to the people that we want to connect with. And when I think about why people take apps off their phones, number one is they don't use it, no utility, didn't find value. They also see things like battery. Okay, everybody develop better apps so we're not draining everyone's battery. But then followed by that is too many notifications and too much advertising. When I think about personalization, I see that as a way for us to offset those objections of making sure there's utility because it's personalized to the things I'm interested in doing, and making sure that notifications and advertising that do show up on lock screens are relevant, they're delivered at the right time, they're about things I care about, and they bring a utility at the right pace that's right for me. And that will be different for all sorts of consumers. And I think at Razorfish, we're very excited, and I'm personally very excited about the idea of personalization in the service economy and all the things that I think AI will unlock in terms of being able to go faster and to have more personalized stories. And I think the one thing I want to encourage people to think about as they're thinking about those apps and how to deliver that personalization is not just about what AI is going to unlock from a creative perspective, but also what else is required to make those that co-creation with AI meaningful. So part of that is how you organize your data. You're not personalizing anything unless you actually understand your consumers and have your data organized in a way that you can easily mine and react in real time. And the second is making sure that your MarTech and AdTech stacks are actually connected and talking to each other and talking to your data assets. And so those enablers, I think, are really important when we think about the experience, because I think it's easy to think about the experience, but how we actually deliver it will be interesting. And I think we all have that job ahead of us coming out of this conference of how we're going to help our clients think about how to activate what the promise of AI and personalization can mean for us at scale.
Really well said. And I think when it comes to data and we talk about personalization, I mean, let's face it, deprecation of the cookies happening, maybe 2030, maybe I don't know when it's going to happen, but we know it's coming. We keep talking about it. Joe, I would love to understand from a privacy perspective and those concerns, how can we strike a balance between those personalized experiences, especially on our mobile home screen, with ensuring that we're respecting privacy of those consumers?
Yes. This is a very, very important question. So how many of you have, by a show of hands, let's listen to Tricia here and engage a little bit. We'll do audience participation time. How many of you have received, while in Cannes, a push notification that was completely irrelevant? Like Shake Shack is bombing me right now. I love a Shake Shack if anybody can get me a Shake Shack, but I'm getting offers for Shake Shack right now. And it's that intrusiveness, it has an impact on my perception of the brand, right? Any more brand is experience and experience is brand. And even though those hard driving performance calls to action and so forth can be effective, they have to be, they'll be most effective when they're in the right place at the right time to the right consumer. It's no rocket science when it comes to that. So to Dani's point around the notion of personalization, the notion of privacy, I think go hand in hand here. These are not at odds. Privacy and the understanding of how to connect with consumers on consumers' terms is an evolving landscape. And one of the things that Universal McCann, I've only been a part of the team for about a year now, and I will tell you one of the reasons I joined that team is Universal McCann was one of the first, if not the first, media agencies to have a chief privacy officer appointed in the organization. And that role and that team look after things like what's happening in the state of Washington right now, where individual states are bringing health data laws online such that individual brands can't go to market like we used to. We actually have to have a 50 state go-to-market strategy in the US, because now what's happening with CCPA is being picked up by multiple states. Wow. What's happening in the state of Washington is being considered in multiple states. And we see this internationally as well across regions that have diverse privacy requirements that are being demanded, by the way, by consumers as we try to take back some of the control of what's on our home screen. Even though that annoying, $3 off offer that I'm getting from Shake Shack, it goes much further when it comes to things like what happened with the Roe v. Wade, geo-tracking, where all of a sudden now all of the geo-tracking capabilities started to get called into question because of abortion laws changing in the United States. And this is such a dynamic space that to not be 2 steps ahead of it, to not be curious about it, to not test and learn into it, to not, all of us in this stage, be somewhat of a subject matter expert in this is going to be, I think, a big challenge as we move forward. But in that is also an enormous opportunity, because the brands that bring the respect that the two of you have just talked about, I think will win in brand and in performance.
Yeah, the one thing I would add too, to build on that, Joe, is that when we did some research at Razorfish, we saw that in the month leading up to the research, consumers had changed their password, signed up for 2-factor authentication, turned off geolocation, and done a whole host of activities on their phone that really indicate, and was very striking, how much consumers care about their data privacy and how critical it is. And I think you just hit on a really key point. The brands that build the trust because of their transparency on data use are the brands that are going to win, because it's so easy to lose that trust, especially when it comes to consumers' information, and rebuilding is nearly impossible. So couldn't agree more in terms of the importance of data privacy, and as marketers, how critical it is for us all to engage and understand as it gets more and more complex.
Exactly.
Thanks, Dani. And, with that complexity and that privacy concern, we have to also think about how technology can help drive those data-driven solutions. Abhay, I have a question for you. How do you think we can help users navigate through this vast economy of, Shake Shack ads and all the stuff that we're being bombarded with every single day?
Yeah, I don't think anybody has ever woken up saying, I like seeing ads. So I think, for an industry of our size and potential, for it to be having that sort of negative consumer sentiment is actually not good at all. And I think as an industry, we need to change that sentiment. But at the same point in time, what I've also seen is that if the consumers have the right value exchange, they're actually willing to participate in the economy willingly and knowingly. So in fact, there are three big macros that you talked about and you talked about as well, is that the privacy is here and now and real. And if anything, it's going to become even more and more and more stringent. The devices that we hold in our hand are going to become more and more and more powerful. And the models that are being created through AI and through personalization are going to become even more relevant. So if we take these three things together, I only see one future where potentially the things are actually going to start moving from server right onto the device itself, where the consumer will not only be in control of consent, but consumer will be totally in control of how they want to be perceived, how they want the information that is coming to them be seen by them or not seen by them at all. Today, we see that custodians of those consent are still the large corporations, and those corporations are, one can argue whether they are doing it for privacy or for commercial gains, but that's for a different debate. So ultimately, we believe that if users need to be in complete control of their own privacy, we need to imagine a world where there is a privacy sandbox that is running, which is not owned by Android or Apple, but is a privacy sandbox that is very fundamental to the device itself, where the consumer has the right of saying, oh, this is the sort of information that I want to share, this is not the information I want to share, and this is how I want advertisers to perceive me, and not part of like 10,000 different audience cohorts that might exist. And Shake Shack thinks you're probably a big customer of theirs while you don't think they are. So that's the world that I think, and as a technologist, that makes me very, very excited, because it has probably never been possible in the last 10, 12 years, where consumers have truly been in control of their data and how that data gets used.
My 4-year-old, just for the record, survives on Shake Shack, so that's why I'm such a good customer.
You're getting
That's
the ads,
exactly
huh?
right. Exactly. Yep. Giuseppe and Shake Shack. He's a lifelong loyalist, I can just tell. So
they know.
they know.
Attention is something you guys have probably seen one or two sessions about that so far this week. I want to pivot a little bit and ask you, Dani, because we know attention spans are shrinking, I think thanks to the pandemic and the fact that we're constantly consuming content, and we talked about, children being those super ninjas of being able to master technology the way that they do. How do you think we can continue to capture users' attention, especially when it comes to the mobile lock screen?
Yeah, it's definitely a great question and a great challenge. And I was going to say, for all of those of you that do have Gen Alphas at home, there is good news. We did do some research at Razorfish to understand Gen Alpha, how they think about mobile devices and what that experience means for them. And they are not digitally native. We do call them digital ninjas. And that's because they are adept at using the technology. They understand the screens, the purpose, why they use a tablet versus a PC versus a phone, and what those use cases are, and when it should be a seamless experience. But they are also very aware of how to balance their usage, which was very different in the data than what we saw with Gen Z, in terms of them naturally wanting to monitor their time with friends, in person, and all of those kinds of things. I think we also see in some of our research that we've done on gaming and the metaverse that Gen Z, more than half of them feel like their authentic self in the metaverse and in gaming. And I think that's a great nugget for us to be thinking about when we think about the lock screen and how personalization plays a really key role. And as we think about immersive experiences, it's going to come down to tapping into people's authenticity and being authentic as a brand and building those connections. Razorfish is an experience agency. We're a marketing transformation agency focused on what does that authenticity look like? How do we connect brands and humans, and how do we think about what that unlocks through your mobile device. And so for us, we're very excited about how to drive those experiences, whether it starts on the lock screen, continues to an app, or even goes into virtual reality. And there's so many rich moments here in Cannes where we've thought about, wouldn't it be amazing with this mobile device in our pocket to enable a full augmented reality experience of all the celebrity and glamour that's here in Cannes that we get a glimpse of today, but over the years there's been so much. So I think it comes back to being authentic, understanding your consumers, personalization, and I think what you touched on in terms of timing and understanding how they want their data to be used and delivering that trust.
If I could jump in just super quick on this point, the work that Razorfish has done on this subject is fantastic, and one of the things to build on this is I think there is a misnomer that we need to course correct in terms of the attention economy. And we hear this phrase attention economy a lot. There's more, correct me if I'm wrong here, there's more long form video, long form content being consumed on more mobile devices than ever before. So it isn't that we, I think, have a lack of attention. We're willing to watch serialized content on Saturdays, binge watch for hours and hours and hours. We're willing to stay up way too late because the autoplay to the next episode happens. When my wife is asleep and I'm on my iPhone and I'm watching Netflix, I'm completely stream cheating on her on the show that we should be watching together, but she's asleep. So we're willing to do that. What is not the case anymore is, if we think about just a couple generations ago, you'd turn on the television and you'd have basically to settle with whatever was being broadcast to you. Now, because
my kids call that the olden days.
The olden days, yes, like only 10 years ago, 15 years ago, for the record, but the olden days. And this point is that proliferation of content, we have more choices than ever, puts pressure on brands to be more relevant. And this is the point, I think, a really good theme coming out of this conversation, is that notion of relevance, that notion of how do brands connect with consumers, whether it's advertising, long-form content, brand-sponsored content, which is a big, big piece of this. How that shows up in mobile, it's just a relevancy play. So as much as the attention economy has been at the forefront of this conversation, I think we need to talk about really the relevance economy. Like, how do brands stay relevant in the face of so many options and in the face of so many distractions and so many options that our kids will only have more and more and more of in the years ahead?
Relevance is so key, and we've got about 2 minutes, so I'm going to do a little quick rapid fire with you guys. Speaking of relevance, Joe, favorite app and why?
Ooh, this is a tough one. Favorite app or most used app?
Most used.
Most used app is probably... I'm gonna be honest here. I spent 200 nights last year on the road, so my Bonvoy app was extreme. And actually, in all honesty, right place, right time experience on the Bonvoy app. It knows where I am, when I'm going to check in. It prompts me to check in early. It gives me options in terms of what time I'm going to check in. When you think about like the usefulness on that, most 5 to 7 apps that are kind of used. It stands out to me as one that adds enormous value and relevance in my travel experience because I'm on the road 200 nights a year.
So can Bonvoy talk to you on your lock screen? You're cool with that?
Yes.
We'll have to disagree with this one. My lock screen has my 4-year-old son Giuseppe on it and only my 4-year-old son on it as much as possible. I try to turn all the other notifications off except apparently for Shake Shack.
Fair. Abhay, what about you? Most used app. Is it Bonvoy? We talked. You travel a lot.
Yeah, no, I travel a lot, but unfortunately, my most used app is TikTok, and I'm trying to get me off that app.
Have you had the guy come up that goes, "Whoa, you've been spending way too much time"?
I've sat across the TikTok CEO, and I'm like, dude, you got to get me de-addicted.
Okay.
I think my time in the loo has increased only because of TikTok, and I got to get off it.
Awesome, Dani. What about you?
I'm a big traveler as well, so my Delta app gets a lot of usage, but I will say I'm kind of obsessed with my Google feed, only because I like to experiment when I start clicking on things, how the algorithm is going to start serving different kinds of content and how you can go down rabbit holes that you didn't even know kind of existed out there from a what does that mean of these worlds that we can tap into, especially as we think about community marketing and how that's changing. So that's kind of like my current obsession of just how can I train the algorithm or trick the algorithm into bringing me new worlds that I wouldn't normally find on my own.
Awesome. Well, it's going to be a very interesting time ahead. I'm super excited to see how this space develops. Thank you all so much for the time.